everybody, thanks for watching. This week we are in chapter 26, almost at the end of Matthew, and we're going to finish up by the end of the year. It's going to be our last Bible study, so that way we can start with John. I think John we're going to start in January. So this is really exciting because a lot of you are celebrating Christmas as the birthday of Jesus, even though it really wasn't the birthday of Jesus. What you call Jesus, I call him Yahushua, because Yahushua was his true Hebrew name. And that's what I've decided to call him, by his true Hebrew name that comes from his father Yahweh, because Yahweh and also Yahuwah, Yehovah, and Yahweh are all the names of God, and the name Yahushua also comes from the Yah of God. So that's why I call him that. So this week is exciting because we're in chapter 26, and this is in preparation for the crucifixion of Yeshua. And a lot of you are celebrating the birthday. For me, this year is a little bit different because I have realized that a lot of the pagan ways are not my ways anymore. But it doesn't matter, because I can still be happy and joyful in knowing, as we read the story, that he defeated the grave through the resurrection. So with that, let's get into Matthew 26 today. So as I said, we were going to be reading today about where the religious leaders were setting the stage for the crucifixion and the arrest of Yeshua. And this was only because Judas was a wolf hiding as a sheep among them. He sounded like a sheep. They thought that he was a sheep, but truly he turned out to be a wolf. It doesn't matter, because Yahushua, he knew that what he was going to do, and he knew the kind of person that he was, but he still led him inside of his circle, despite all the things that Yahushua did for him. There was 3 years that they were learning from him. They were close to him. They were eating, they were sleeping with him near each other. They were traveling together. They were having campfire talks in the desert and learning sermons, and Yahushua was teaching them spiritual things. He was teaching them about the new kingdom that was coming. He would pray with them. He would heal them. He would witness miracles. They would be the witnesses to his miracles. And he also provided for their every need. And despite all of that, he still turned against Yahushua. So today we're going to learn why. And this is a really big chapter. There's over 60 verses here, so I'm hoping that we're going to get these done. So as you can see, that ravenous wolves come into our lives. And that is a part of our life. And the reason that that's there is for our redemption and for theirs as well. So with that said, let's get to understanding chapter 26 of the Bible of Matthew. Verse number 1, and it came to pass, when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, ye know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. Here, Yeshua is telling us that he is basically done teaching them, because he knows what's coming. He knows that this is it. This was the 3 years, and we're at the timing, God's timing, right? And then he starts talking to them about what's coming in the next few days. So he's been preparing them for 3 years, but now he's really got to tell them this is what's going to happen. And he's also showing that he's in control of all of this. This is not going to be a surprise for him. Not something that he didn't know about. He's in total control of all of the events and the timing and all of this. He's also telling the multitudes several times around here, he's telling them about the corruption of the religious leaders. And he's also telling the disciples about how he's going to fulfill the work of the cross. He's telling them that, but do we really think that they really understand what he's saying? I don't think that they really do. So in the Geneva Bible, when I read the chapter in there, it says that Yeshua was going to fulfill now the job that Adam failed to do in the beginning in Genesis. And that's exactly what it is. He's a second Adam. So Yeshua is letting the disciples know that this is going to happen because it has to happen. In case they thought that nothing could ever happen to Yeshua, or they were just like listening to him. I mean, this guy's like he can do so many miraculous things, right? They probably thought, well, if they come after him, he'll probably like do some. He had to make sure that they understood what was happening here. Let's go on. Verse number 3. Then assembled together the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people unto the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. But they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people. So these people were conniving here. As we know, we've been reading in the chapters how they've been plotting to try to see how they can get rid of him, get rid of Yahushua. So here, this is alluding that the only way that they can get to Yahushua was to scheme something to take away his life. That was the only way that they could do it. So this Caiaphas was the ruling high priest. He served 18 years longer than most high priests because he cooperated with the Romans, and he was the son-in-law of Annas. And Annas, we'll learn about him in a moment. So two years after the crucifixion, this Caiaphas was removed from office, and that could be because his conscience, he couldn't bear that he had murdered Yahushua. So he killed himself in AD 35 because he was the one that first recommended that Yeshua's death was needed in order to save the nation. And you can find that in John 11, 49 and 50. Just so you know, I'm just going to say that in the spirit, you should know that your job, like Caiaphas here, your job should never stand in the way of what is right and what is the right thing to do. And even though you have political people telling you to do something, and you see that this is the corruption that we have in this country right now, because everybody's taking bribes from everybody, your job should not be something that you're going to corrupt yourself for. Because guess what? You might do something today that they're telling you to do, and tomorrow they just might kick you out. So you have to go to God with prayer for the things that they ask you to do, and know what would Yeshua do, right? So anyway, there were talks to not put Yeshua to death during the Passover, because that is what they did anyway, despite the fact that this was against the feast of the unleavened bread, which is celebrated throughout the Passover. So these religious leaders, they also feared the people because of the population in Jerusalem during the time of the Passover. I mean, this place, like, everybody goes to Jerusalem for the Passover. It was a huge celebration. There were so many people there during the feast. And the religious leaders understood that Yeshua was so popular that they didn't want to create some kind of riots there if they arrested him during the Passover. So that's what they were talking about here. Number 6, now when Jesus was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, 7, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. Verse number 8, but when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? Verse number 9, for this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, why trouble ye the woman? For she has wrought a good work upon me. 11, for ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. Verse number 12, for in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verse number 13, verily I say unto you, whosoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also that this woman hath done be told for a memorial of her. So in this verse, he is talking about Mary, and she was the sister of Lazarus and also the sister of Martha. And she was also mentioned in the book of John, verse 12. Now, before this event here that we're talking about, and it's not talked about in this book, it's talked in another book, Lazarus, her brother, had died, and Yeshua had come out, and they had given up. They had called him and he didn't come, and they were mad at him because he didn't come. So by the time that Yeshua got there, Her brother was already wrapped in clothing. Thing was done. His body, then they didn't want to open it. He had been dead for 3 days. So they thought that it was going to smell that. And Yeshua said, open the door. And he came out alive. So think about this kind of a miracle. I mean, this was witnessed by disciples and by lots of people that were there. So this was a big thing for her in her life. Wouldn't it be for all of you as well? So she was the one that sat at the feet of Yahushua in the book of Luke 10:39, and she was also expressing devotion to Yeshua. She had gratitude for what he had done for her brother, and she understood that he was truly the Son of God. I mean, can you imagine something like this? So this alabaster jar were carved from a translucent gypsum that had no handles, but it had a long neck that was broken when you needed to get to the content. So the perfume would be inside of this flask. And it was usually, there was two kinds. There was ones that were small and you suspended them from a cord and you wore it around your neck. And then there were also others. You were allowed to wear this on the Sabbath. And that's how important this was to women, this jar of perfume. And it was worth a whole year's wages, what was in the jar. So what happened here was the disciples, when they saw that she broke this and she put all the oil, she was going to give him all the oil, they were criticizing her. And she was demonstrating here there was an act of love and honor that she had for Yahushua. Remember, she understood this was truly the Son of God. I mean, there was no way she was going to think otherwise. Her brother was dead for 3 days. He brought him back to life. She was a witness to this, and she understood she wasn't with him for 3 years like they were. Yahushua was not criticizing anything about the generosity to the poor in this verse 11, where he talks about the poor. Just speaking at that moment and about the honor to him, bringing to mind Deuteronomy 15:11. So by saying this, Yeshua was pointing out the special sacrifice that Mary made for him. That was all that conversation was about. It wasn't about not taking care of the poor. So she might not have understood the significance of what she was doing truly, but she was still giving her love to him because she knew he was going to suffer. She understood because she was listening to and those days they were all gathered there, and she was listening to all the things that he was speaking to the disciples about. So usually this oil is used for kings that are anointed, and priests would use it for burial as well. So it was kind of like she was demonstrating, I recognize who you are, but I also recognize what you're doing for me. So now the one that was specifically annoyed with this was Judas. So could it be that Judas was jealous that this sinful woman, because she was a sinful woman in the past, and she was demonstrating more worship and praises for Yeshua because she understood what Yeshua was telling them. And he could have felt convicted the way that he was feeling towards Yeshua, right? Because later on, remember, he betrays him. So from that to this, I don't think it goes in one day. I think this is something slowly that he's starting to conjure up in his head. And it's just starting to realize that Yeshua was not going to start any type of a political type of rebellion. He was not that kind of Messiah. And he was truly, Judas, expecting a political position in the new kingdom. And we talked about that in several chapters. They were looking at the other religious leaders, and they were assuming from the perspective of life that they were also going to have positions in this new kingdom. And he was starting to see that this was not actually what he thought it was going to be. He was not going to have a position. This was going to be spiritual. And what he was really after, his interest was money and status. So this is where he starts to flip on him at this point. And not only that, but also the scent from this essential oil It's wafting through the air, and now everybody is smelling it, and it's just annoying him even more. So that's why he ends up leaving the house. But she was commended for this because she was giving her heart to something that was unusually done, and that's why he received it as pure. Yahushua really enjoyed it because it was something so pure and loving that came from her. So if you're interested more about Judas, who was also a thief, and he was the keeper of the money bag for the poor, and how he would help himself to some of the money, you can read that in John 12:4. So you can see that this person, Yeshua knew, like I said, that he was a wolf hiding as a sheep, but he needed to have him there. These people have to be around us for us to grow and learn, and for them as well to have the opportunity for redemption. In verse number 14, then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priests and said unto them, what will ye give me? And I will deliver him unto you. They covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. These are pretty serious words here. So you can see when he left, he was so angered that he decided to betray Yeshua. Because Judas felt insulted there at the house, this was done a few days before he actually betrayed Yahushua. So he had time to think, and he still decided to do this. Some people want to speculate why Judas would have betrayed him in such a negative way. He was looking for putting a Messiah in a political box, right? Yeshua was not the type of Messiah that he thought he was, and he felt disillusioned and perhaps angry that he was following along and he wasn't going to get the status and the money that he thought. And he could have thought that the religious leaders were winning after witnessing some of the conflict between all of them, and he was choosing to go on the winning side because there was probably, he knew that things were getting heated there, and he probably wanted at this point to just say, look, I'm walking away. And that's the problem. When you see something like that, you can walk away. But he didn't just walk away. He decided to turn to the other side. That is the problem here. So even though he decided, this guy is not, is just a prophet. He's not, I don't want to do this anymore. He still decided to do this. His motive was really about greed, because he sold out for 30 pieces of silver, which was worth at that time $25. And that was the price of a slave. If you go to Exodus 22:32, that's what it says the price of a slave was 30 pieces of silver. Verse 17, now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Yeshua, saying unto him, where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? Verse number 18, and he said, go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, the master saith, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. Verse number 19, and the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now when the even was come, he sat down with the 12. So this day would have been a commemorative time, because the Passover was the deliverance of Israel from Egypt, which was also an act of redemption from the Old Testament. And now we are going to see a new type of redemption. So there are some conflicts within the gospel, because the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that the last meal that Yahushua had with the disciples was the Passover meal on the day of the Passover. But in the book of John 13:1, it took place before the Passover, and that Yahushua was actually crucified on the Passover in John 18. So there's a conflict there because of the time of day. It's going to come up now. There's suspicion that he because he knew of his death, he wanted to have the meal prior to the crucifixion with his disciples. And we can read about that in Luke 22:15 and 16. And this is because the Jewish day began at sundown, and Yeshua was killed on the same day. They consider day different time kind of thing. It's 21. And as they did eat, he said, verily I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. 22. And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, he that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. 24. The Son of Man goeth as it is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. Verse 25. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? He said unto him, Thou hast said. This is the meal where Yahushua is going to tell them that one of them is going to betray him. And despite the fact that they lived together for 3 years, this is going to be something pretty surprising to some of the disciples. And this was going to be unpleasant to hear at a Passover meal. And we also have to remember that the first sacrificial lamb, God told Moses to eat it with bitter herbs. And we're going to read about that a little bit later. So if you go back to when we read the Exodus, and that's coming up in January. So stay tuned, because those videos that I'm transferring over here, Exodus is starting in January. So Judas was truly a hypocrite when he asked if it was him who would betray Yahushua, because he already knew what he had done. But truly, no one suspected another person. And they just, basically, they couldn't imagine. I mean, they probably felt like brothers with each other. But remember that he was an interested party, this Judas. So when Yahushua told him, you have said it, it wasn't to condemn him, but it was to see if he would repent at what he had done, but he did not. And also this part here where it talks about dipping a hand in a dish, that was common with some dishes back in that time, where everyone took from the same bowl with their hands. They would just reach in and just serve themselves with their hand. 26. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it. For this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So in the book of John, it was speculated that Judas left before this meal. That's what's speculated in the book of John. So everything in the Passover meal had a symbolic type of meaning. Like we talked about before, the bitter herbs represented the time they were in slavery. The salt for the tears that were shed under Egypt's rule. The lamb was the sin offering and sacrifice that would allow the judgment of God to pass over the household of those that believed in God. And now for the foods, he was representing them in himself and the sin that he was going to bear through his suffering. It was not going to be any longer about Israel and Egypt. Now this was like a whole new thing. We weren't going to concentrate on that anymore. He was going to be the sacrificial lamb for us. So the symbology for us when we eat the bread, we have to remember that Yeshua was also broken into pieces like the bread and beaten for us, for our salvation. And when we drink the cup, we remember of his blood that he gave for us so that we can commune with him. And that's why it's called the Eucharist. When you go to church, it's like taking communion is what that is. So we're going to verse 30. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. So listen to this. I thought this was interesting. So after this meal, this was actually the last meal that Yahushua had with them, and they sang a song in worship with the disciples, Yahushua with the disciples, to God that night before being betrayed, and he knew he was going to be betrayed, but he still sang, he praised and worshiped God. Now, the Passover meal, this was customary after the Passover meal, that it would include singing. This tradition was called, you would sing the Hallel, which were the verses of Psalms 116 and 118. So make sure that you put this on pause, or at the end, you go over there and you list and you read Psalms 116 all the way to 118 to listen to the words of what they were singing and what they all sang after the Passover, because that was a tradition back then. Verse 31, then saith Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. Peter answered and said unto him, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. 34, Jesus said unto him, verily I say unto thee, that this night before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. 35, Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. That's important, because the notes are coming now, that Peter said that, and the disciples said it as well. So let's talk about this. Yahushua was showing the disciples that he was in control, and he knew what was going to happen before he suffered as the Messiah, but it had to be fulfilled this way. But he was letting them know what was happening, right? And he's also here, he's mentioning the resurrection, which is really important. I mean, this is like the highlight, he's coming back from the dead. This is like the highlight. Do you really think that they understood this, despite the fact that he saw what happened with Lazarus? So Peter, who we saw in earlier chapters of Mathew, not too long ago, it was in the early 20s, was named the Rock by Yeshua. He did not understand that he was going to endure a spiritual battle, because he was going to be intimidated and he would be denying Yahushua. So he was truly overestimating himself, because it's actually better to be a follower that fails than to not follow. So it's better to be a follower that fails than to not follow. For those of you that are thinking, I don't know if I could do this, look at this. It is better to be a follower that fails than to not follow. Peter, eventually, you're going to see what happens to him, but eventually he got himself back up again, right? He failed, but he was still a follower, and he eventually went to write his own books in the Bible. It's believed that he also helped Mark to write his book of the Bible as well. So let's go on to 36 here. Then cometh Jesus with them into a place called Gethsemane, and saith unto the disciples, sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. Then saith unto them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. 39, and he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let the cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. The Garden of Gethsemane means olive press, because it is surrounded by olive leaves, which also have to be broken up to make oil, just like Yeshua. So Yeshua, he was feeling uneasy, knowing of the physical things that he was going to be enduring, and he was going to receive spiritual punishment as well as physical in front of his enemies for the place of all of us guilty sinners, so he can be sin for us. I want you to stop there for a second and understand this, okay? This was going to happen in front of his enemies. It was going to look like they defeated him. Can you imagine knowing that the next day, people are doing this stuff at you, right? Can you imagine physically being at a point where you know that they're going to look like they won, and everybody's going to look like you were a true loser? And that's exactly what he's doing here. This is why he's hurting inside because he doesn't want, it has to be this way. It can't be any other way. But understand, what would your position be on something like that? Knowing that the next day you were going to be mocked, you were going to be hit, and the whole world was going to think that you were a big loser, that everything that you were doing was a lie. Okay? That's hard to understand, but he did that for you and for me. Okay? He put himself in that way, and he was uneasy about it, and he still did it anyway. You can read about this in 1 Corinthians 5:21, and also understand that during the Passover, the lamb was what was served, and he is going to be now our Passover type lamb to turn away the wrath of God from us. That is what he is doing here for us. But he prayed under the will of God and the cup of judgment. See Isaiah 51:17 and 25:15. And there was no other possible way. He had to do it like this for our salvation. If not, the disciples and all of us would all be dead. Okay. So notice that he prayed first. This was the very beginning of redemption. The plan of Yeshua begins. When he started to pray, that was the beginning of what was coming, because he needed to fill himself with the truth of what he had to do. And he had to fill himself, and he had to have that relationship with the Father at that point, to come to him in prayer. So if he needs to pray and he is Yahushua, what about us? Why don't we pray? Why don't we try to look for relationship during the hard times with our Heavenly Father? This is an example that he's setting for us. Verse number 40, and he cometh unto the disciples and findeth them asleep, and saith unto Peter, what could ye not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away again the second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. 43, and he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. 44, and he left them and went away again and prayed the third time, saying the same words. 45, then cometh he to his disciples and saith unto them, sleep on now and take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. 46, rise, let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me. All right, so let's talk about this. Even Yehoshua looked for help in his prayers, because that's how uneasy he felt. And it's just seek Yahweh in prayer alone, through fervent prayer in private. So he didn't have anybody who was coming. They didn't come and pray with him. So he went out and he did it anyway in private. And he needed that connection with the Father. So Yahushua also knew that Peter would fail him. But he was encouraged, because if he would have prayed, he might have kept from denying Yahushua later. If Peter would have prayed, he probably needed to fill himself with the will of God, right? And if he was stronger in his faith by praying with Yahushua, perhaps he wouldn't have denied Yahushua had he done that with him that night. But the enemy is going to tempt us to keep us always from praying and connecting with Abba, our Father in heaven. So because he knows that that's when we become the strongest. So he gave in to the flesh and he went to sleep, but maybe he could have spent a little bit of time praying with him, knowing that this is a very serious situation that Yeshua was going through. I don't think they really understood what was going to happen. Even though they were hearing it, they didn't really understand it. Maybe because they had it so well for 3 years. So Yahushua knew that later they would end up blaming themselves for not spending their last opportunity to pray with Yahushua, who was in need at that time. And those are verses that are coming up in the future. We also learned that he prayed the same prayer 3 times. We're talking about Yahushua here. And he needed that to feel comfort. He needed to do that. And it also shows us that when we are in times of distress, it's okay if we have repetitive prayer that we give to the Father, to Abba the Father, because we're so stressed at that point. Like, I know we've read in the past, he's talked about not repetitious prayer, but in this, it's a different type of situation. This is fervent prayer from from something painful that's inside your soul and your heart, and you need to get it out. You need to connect desperately with your Father in heaven. So Yeshua was accepting his fate, and he is going to stand up to his oppressors because he was fully in control of the Father's will. That's what he was meditating on, the will of the Father. That was why he needed to have the Father in prayer that night, so that he can make sure that he was strong, understanding the will of his Father. All right, let's go on. Verse 47, and while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves, from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he. Hold him fast. And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Yeshua said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Yeshua and took him. This is the moment where the whole story starts to unfold here. These men, they came with weapons, believing that Yahushua was dangerous, because Judas led them there because he received a bribe for giving them the information of where he was. Think about this. They came with weapons thinking that he was dangerous. Now, these were Roman soldiers who were there because of the Passover celebration, and because the crowds were so big during the Passover celebration, the Romans sent additional reinforcement because of the time during the feast there. They were kind of like loaned, but they were under the commands of the religious leader priests. So Judas, he kissed Yahushua to identify him to the soldiers as a hypocrite that he was. When Yahushua responded to him, calling him friend, it was a contrast to the actions of what he was just doing. He was actually the accuser in the trial. This is why he had to show them who he was by the kiss, because he had promised in exchange for the money not just to tell them who he was, because they couldn't just grab him. They needed to have an actual witness who was willing to go to court to be the accuser of Yahushua. And that's what he did. It wasn't just give the kiss and betray him. He was actually willing to go to trial. That's what he got paid for. He was willing to go to trial to stand up against Yahushua. That's how bad it was. Verse 51, and behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. Then said Yahushua unto him, Put up again thy sword unto his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. 53, thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? Verse 54, but how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that thus it must be? 55, in that same hour said Yahushua to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves for to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and ye laid no hold on me. Verse 56, but all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. So they purposely came at night because they were afraid of the crowds during the Passover. And the book of John in 18:10 tells us that it was Peter that lifted the sword, because at that time it was dangerous in the area and they carried a sword for protection. Peter was more willing to fight a battle than actually pray with Yahushua the night before. So if you can see, this was instinctual feeling because he felt like they were defeated. And he knew that Yahushua's kingdom was about victory. So he was probably confused at that moment and just acted impulsively. Luke 22:51 tells Yeshua touched the ear and healed this man. So how many of us fight more than we pray? That's something that we have to really understand. How many of us fight with our family, with our husband, more than we pray? Maybe when you're angry and you want to lash out at somebody, you need to go and pray first about it. It's difficult to do, but it's a lot of times the best way. So Yahushua here was letting them know he was in control and allowing the scriptures of the prophets to be fulfilled according to prophecy. And the disciples, they took off and they scattered in many different directions. Eventually, Peter and John returned to see what was happening, but from a distance. Remember, a few hours earlier, they were claiming all to die for him, then desert him. And that was back in verse 35. Remember that I told you that, 35. Let's go to verse 57 now. And they that had laid hold on Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. Verse 58, but Peter followed him afar and unto the high priest's palace and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Before Yahushua was taken to Caiaphas, he was brought to Annas, who was the ex-priest, who really still had the power. They brought Yahushua there first, to Annas first. And that you can find it in John 18, verse 12 to 14, and also in John 18, verses 19 to 23. So what the religious leaders wanted was to rush the trial to make it in 24 hours because they didn't want the Sabbath to be involved in the time frame. They wanted this to be quick because they wanted it before the Sabbath. So these Sanhedrin were gathered to judge Yahushua in an official session at night at Caiaphas' home and not at the temple. So they were doing stuff that was just not the way it's done. So Peter was really watching from a distance. He was concerned about what Yahushua had told him, that he would deny him, and was looking for a way to prove Yahushua wrong. So he was trying to find an opportunity where he can go to him. So he had a good heart because he still felt connected to Yahushua. This high council was the most powerful religious political body of the Jewish people. It controlled Israel's government, and they allowed the people to handle their civil and religious disputes in the daily life. So they didn't really interfere much. They let them do their own stuff there. But a death sentence had to be approved by Romans, and that you can find it in John 18:31. Verse 59, now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Yahushua to put him to death. Verse number 60, but found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came 2 false witnesses. 61, and said, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. This was actually a nighttime trial that was illegal according to the Sanhedrin law and rules, that the trials begin and end during daylight. So all of this, like I said, was wrong. And they actually made up the second trial at daylight, although they had already made their decision. They had made a second trial. You can read about that in Luke 22, verse 66 to 71. So according to law, the trial should start with bringing evidence before one was accused. And if you were a false witness and it was discovered you were a false witness, you were punished by death. But evidently, nothing happened to these men who were false witnesses. They were breaking their own rules. They were trying to find false testimony against Yahushua, but they couldn't find any. Even though he lived a public life, it was difficult to find someone against Yahushua. So that's why they had to make up these false people that were willing to do this. So they found those two witnesses who distorted Yahushua's words about the temple. This was kind of like a modern day like bomb threat, because he was talking about his resurrection. You can see that in John 2:2. What he really was referring to the temple as the body, that he was talking about the resurrection and how his body was the temple and it was going to come back. But they were not reading the scriptures. They were not reading the prophecies that he kept telling them about. This verse 62, and the high priest arose and said unto them, answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? 63, but Jesus held his peace, and the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. 64, Yeshua said unto them, thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. So he didn't speak like a lamb to be slaughtered. He was confronted by what should have been an impartial judge who was frustrated by his silence and who knew he had no base to arrest him and tried to bully him into an actual declaration. And then the answer came direct and quick. Yeshua warned that one day he was going to judge over them. And the power that he was referring to was of Yahweh, which is a sacred name. Verse 65, then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, he hath spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. What think ye? They answered and said, he is guilty of death. 67, then did they spit in his face and buffeted him, and others smote him with the palms of their hands. 68, saying, prophesy unto us, thou Christ, who is he that smote thee? They accused Yahushua of blasphemy, but he was really the Son of God. They hit him, they spit on him, they slapped him, they pounded him with their fists because they did not know who he was. But yet, it was more like they refused to admit who he was because they had seen the miracles and they refused to accept him as the Messiah because they didn't go back and they didn't look at the scriptures and started to see all of the things were lining up. So this is the same thing for us. This is not any different than our lives. We have to also decide if Yahushua's words are blasphemy after knowing the story. Do you decide, yes, this is the truth and I want you in my life, Yahushua? Or do you say, no, I don't believe none of this? It's the same decision that you're going to have to make that the religious leaders had to make. So also, do you do the same thing with God? Are you his enemy? Do you deny his deity, reject his word, prefer your own truth to that of his word? Or Yahushua's truth? Do you deny those? And do you turn away from his son? Those are other things as well that you have to look at in your life. So going back to the story, this must have been really hard for Yahushua to endure and to not send an army to judge these people immediately for the things that they were doing. This had to be really hard on him. I mean, he has the power to call in a huge amount of angels to defend him. But it was all about timing, and he had to suffer patiently for us because all of this had to play out the way that it needed to in order to save all of us. 69, now Peter sat without in the palace, and a damsel came unto him, saying, thou also wast in Jesus of Galilee. 70, but he denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. 71, and when he was gone out into the porch, another maid saw him and said unto them that were there, this fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. 72, and again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. 73, and after a while came unto him they that stood by, and said to Peter, surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech betray with thee. 74, then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crew. 75, Peter remembered the word of Jesus, which said unto him, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. All right, so Peter's fear could have attracted the servant girl and another girl who were becoming unfriendly to him because he was caving to his fears. And this conviction that he had inside of him was producing this activity around him. He acted confused. He lied, diverting attention to change the subjects. Then he lied under an oath. And then he began to curse and swear. Look at all of the things that he was doing out of this conviction that he was feeling down to his bones and in his soul. He was really being tormented with confusion, I believe, by the demons that were amused at this. And this is why I say that the demons were using these people to mock him, right? He apparently lost control of himself because he felt separated with his association to Yahushua. And this was really amusing his tormentors because he did not appear to be a follower of Yahushua. He was acting like he wasn't a believer. Like if the people saw him, they would have never thought that he was a believer of Yahushua because of the way he was acting. He was even swearing. He was lying. Nobody would have believed that. Now, was he acting that he was doing that? I don't really believe so. I really believe that he felt under demonic because of the fear that was beating him up inside. These demonic people were being used to confuse him. But he was fighting it. He was fighting it because he knew eventually he came to his senses, but and that might have been the reason that he had to go through this to understand what he was doing was wrong. And then later he cried bitterly because he remembered what Yahushua had told him. But eventually he was going to be restored from this is backsliding. His crying would lead him to repentance and a change in his spiritual sense. So sometimes our memories will lead us to repentance, just like it did for Peter, who remembered Yahushua's words when the rooster crowed. And we also have to remember that some of us might pretend around certain people, or we might divert conversations so we don't have to talk about Yahushua. And this is also considered a step in denial. When you are strong in your faith and you know who you are and you know who you follow, you shouldn't be embarrassed or want to deny or conform to the ways of the world. If anything, you should be talking about it because you should be spreading the good news to everybody. So that's going to wrap it up. This was a long one, 75 verses that we read today. I want to talk to you a little bit about the love of money. Remember that Judas put the love of money ahead. He sold out for a handful of coins his eternal treasures. So the love of money can be the root to all kinds of evil. And we see this in our society today, especially in the political spectrum, where these people take bribes all the time and they're sellouts, right? Because they don't realize that they're sellouts, but they have disgraced their legacy, disgraced their honor, and disgraced their family's reputation as well. Not even going to be able to take with them when they leave this planet, right? When you know about sinning and you do it anyway, it's really considered unbelief, and it dishonors Yahweh, our Father, right? It dishonors his commands, because sinning is really unbelief, because it dishonors our Father in heaven, right? So you might feel sorry, you might feel separated, you might feel that you hurt Yahushua, you might hurt Yahweh, that you feel like you want to be restored. You feeling that you understand the sacrifice that he made for you, you're going to trust in faith that Yahushua will be the bridge to restore your relationship with the Father. And that's what repentance is all about. And this whole story is exactly what that is all about, what he did for us so that we come back to the Father. You also have to forgive yourself for turning your own way and allowing for the pieces of restoration in your soul to emerge forth within you through Yahushua, who under the new covenant, we can come directly to him in faith because we don't need a priest or an animal sacrifice to do that for us anymore, okay? We can come directly to him because of his death and his resurrection. So next week is finally the culmination, and all of this is happening. We only have 2 more chapters left. And that will be chapter 27 of Mathew. And then on Tuesday, since I'm not posting the Old Testament until January, I have a video for you on my prayer journal, which I have it here. I said I was going to talk and explain how I've been using it as a prayer journal. It might give you some ideas. If you feel like your prayer life is disorganized, lacking, and you don't feel connected with the Father, then stay tuned for my prayer journal video. So maybe there's some things in there you can take from it for your own life. Thank you so much for watching this week. I hope you have a wonderful week. God bless all of you, and I will see you back later in the week. Bye-bye. Hey, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.